Well, turning now to an update in our Tainted Waters series, looking at groundwater contamination in Murrow and Umatilla counties. At issue are nitrates that seep into the aquifer below the ground. They do not have a taste or smell, but are harmful for people above limits set by the EPA, especially infants and pregnant women, linked to things like cancer and reproductive issues. They come from things like farm fertilizer, wastewater from commercial food production, and large animal operations. The contaminated water in this area, called Lebguama, has been known about for more than 3 decades. The biggest issue we've uncovered in our reporting is that efforts to improve the groundwater have been and are currently voluntary for those most responsible. Last fall, the state laid out a plan to deal with the polluted water that advocates criticized for not going far enough. And earlier this year, for the first time in more than a decade, the State Department of Environmental Quality released a report analyzing the contamination. In a surprise to very few, it's gotten worse and worse. So that's why advocates in the area and around the state were thrilled that the governor was working on legislation to clean things up, basically hoping for some mandatory efforts rather than the voluntary route, which has not worked. And when the Senate Bill 1154 first came out, those advocates, like Oregon Rural Action, voiced their support and helped craft it.
And what it would have done is essentially lay out more of a proactive process for the state, identifying areas with groundwater pollution problems that are starting to become a problem, right? And then where it had risen to the level of public health crisis, set up a different system so that when it's becoming a public health risk, like we have in the lower Umatilla, where people are, their wells are well above safe limits, they've been drinking it for years. If we get to that point somewhere else in Oregon, what are we going to do different? And the idea that we brought to the table was, hey, if we get to the public health crisis level, it cannot be left up to agency discretion to step in. It needs to be very specifically laid out what those agencies are going to do, how they should do it, and the urgency with which they should do it.
But as the bill moved through the legislature, groups like Oregon Rural Action ended up pulling their support, saying industry groups in the region, representing those who contribute to polluting the water, for a lack of a better phrase, pulled the teeth from the bill.
As the bill stands now, and as we see it, once you reach the level of a public health threat, you're still relying on agencies to show the political backbone to stand up to polluters. And if we're going to learn the lesson from the Lebguama, we need to not be doing that. We have 35 years of evidence that in the absence of a massive political pressure campaign from the grassroots, they're not going to step up. We needed the bill to be better.
Well, this is the final version of Senate Bill 1154 that now sits on Governor Tina Kotek's desk. It passed its final hurdle in the House Friday. And listen to what this version will do, with a focus on state agencies and whether or not things are mandatory or voluntary.
The easiest way to understand this is it implements a green, yellow, red type of planning process. As long as the groundwater in an area is healthy and the monitoring looks good, that area stays in the green mode. If monitoring indicates that there are levels of contamination that are ticking up, that area will move to yellow mode. And in that mode, that's where the preliminary and early action occurs to keep the contaminations from getting any worse and to make sure that it stays healthy below human hazard levels. So, and it's a voluntary time in the process. So yellow is voluntary. And then, much like the existing act, if an area gets really critical into the red mode, then other actions can be taken in a coordinated way.
It can be taken in a coordinated way, so voluntary. And in fact, Representative Helm from Beaverton, who you just heard from, later noted that this bill does not do anything for Lebguama. Why is that? The governor has assured the local lawmaker in the area that she doesn't want to get in the way of work being done there now to address the pollution. Those voluntary moves that, as we've said, have only allowed the contamination to get worse decade over decade.
I have received assurances, both in writing and in multiple conversations, that Senate Bill 1154 is not intended to disrupt, override, or preempt the existing LaGuardia structure. The governor's office has explicitly stated that there will be no changes required or contemplated to the current organizational framework, the designated lead agency, or the local citizen advocacy committee that is working collaborative with our state's natural resource agencies. Oregon's water policy should not be one size fits all. We must continue to find ways to support and empower local solutions while holding our state agencies accountable to partnerships based on respect, transparency, and measurable outcomes.
Now, another group that pulled its support from 1154 after changes were made to the bill is called the Center for Food Safety, whose goal is to promote both safe food and the environment. They often find themselves at odds with industrial agriculture, including those in LaGuardia. Here's a senior attorney from that group based here in Portland talking about what this watered-down bill will do.
I think the improvements that it makes are so minimal that I don't see it being very helpful at all to solve the overall problem. And the root problem here is agricultural exceptionalism, where we treat, as policymakers, both federal and state, we treat agriculture as something other than the industry that it is. And I mean, I think, again, like I said, the problem with passing something that is so stripped down is, even if it makes a little tiny bit of a difference, I think it really gives a lot of political cover to the politicians and our elected representatives and our governor's office to say, okay, like, we handled this problem.
Well, on the flip side, there are some in the area who are happy with the end version of 1154. That includes the group Water for Eastern Oregon. It's made up of farmers and businesses who operate in and around the area, no doubt representing the industry that Oregon Rural Action and others blame for letting the contamination continue. Justin Green is the executive director of the group. He's the former DEQ statewide water quality administrator. And here's what he told us about the original 1154 compared to the final version.
Yeah, well, previous versions of the bill contained repetition of existing agency authorities, such as modifying permits and conducting rulemaking. These authorities already exist and are, in fact, have been exercised in the lower Uinta Basin already.
Are they working? History is not on the side of yes, but cleaning up groundwater does not happen overnight. But groups like Oregon Rural Action argue we can't wait another 3 decades to fix something when people have polluted water now. But nonetheless, Green says the bill does do something that should help areas on the front end of contamination.
Well, one of the biggest improvements that 1154 makes is the requirement for state agencies to create an interagency team. That is something that actually businesses and farmers, in coordination with environmental groups, have been asking the state for going back to 2016. So that is a huge step to make sure that the agencies are working together. The governor is declaring a lead agency to oversee that work.